Let's talk about this little bag. So this is a Kelly and this is a Gabe. So this tutorial applies to both mostly because it's the exact same cut of fabric. You're just changing the direction that you use it. So the height becomes the width, the height. So all of the instructions I'm going to give today are about how to make the Kelly, which is a little bit thinner and taller. And then anything I say, though, can be applied to the Gabe, which is a longer version, but almost the same height. I have made the Kellys a little bit taller, but then they tend to get even narrower. It still works. You can go up another 1/4 inch. Actually, I think I have one. Yeah, so this is up another 1/4 inch. You can see that. It's just a little bit taller. Again, same exact cut of fabric. So it's really, you can play with it to get whatever sort of dimension that you want. That's what they look like from the top. All right, so we're talking about this one today. Let me go over the supplies, the materials that you're going to need, and the cuts. So you need an exterior fabric. This is just a quilting cotton. You'll need it, a 3x5 cut for the tabs. You'll need interfacing for your exterior fabric. And then you'll need a lining fabric. This is, again, just quilting cotton. And then you'll need 6 total cuts of this 2-inch wide binding strip. So 2 cuts are going to be 4.5 inches wide. And then 4 of these cuts are going to be 3.5 inches wide. So these are all the ones that will go on the boxed corners, and these are the ones that will go on the end. Now, normally you would have 2 cuts of this size, 10 inches along here, 9 inches along here, and it would be pretty simple. But today I've chosen to use a directional print. So if I just use the same, like I used one big cut of it, then I would end up with half of the bag upside down. And I don't love that. So I wanted to show you how to do that if you do run into a directional print. So we're going to piece these 2 together, which is why my cuts look smaller and my interfacing is smaller. And then here's what you get. So it's just a simple seam along the bottom. You line that up with your zipper and it looks great, right? You can't tell the difference. But we know that that's the only reason that you can see these faces the right side up, or whatever material you're using. See that pattern right side up. I'm going to show you how to do that. But this becomes even simpler if you're just using a non-directional print like this, for instance. Okay, so I'm going to start by fusing all of my interface onto the panels. Then we'll go ahead and iron these into these binding strips. You see how that's a 4, it'll end up being a 4-layer strip. I'll show you those as I'm ironing. And then we'll also prepare the handle, or not the handle, but the little tabs on the side. If it makes you nervous trying to figure out what your individual cuts should be so that they make up the correct size when they're pieced together, just make a really big piece. Just make a bigger piece than you need, and then you can cut it, trim it back down to size later. So don't worry about it. And honestly, it depends on how big of a seam allowance you want here in the middle as to how much you add onto the top and bottom. So what really matters at the end of the day is that your fabric is ultimately 9x10. Now, when I sew these together, I've done this both ways. Right now, the way that I'm doing it, I'm leaving my 1/2 inch seam allowance with no interfacing so that it'll lay a little bit flatter. You certainly, though, could interface all the way up to the line. It's really not going to make that much of a difference as long as you press it well. Fusible fleece, you always want to press from the front. I can test if I've got a good adhesion by trying to peel it away. If it doesn't peel, then I'm good. My first panel done. I'll be sewing these together, the bottoms together. So again, I'll place my fusible fleece on the top. If you've never worked with this before, one side is smooth and fleecy, The other side has little tiny glue dots, and it's much more rough. And so that's the side that you'll put down toward the fabric. All right, I'll test these out. That looks good. I'm going to want them to connect like that. So I will mark, I'll clip these together to sew right along this edge. If you were doing a full piece of fabric and not split, your piece of interfacing would look like this, 9 by 10, and you would lay it onto your main fabric just like that. So I've got my bumpy glue side up, and then I would fuse it. So it becomes really simple if you just have a non-directional fabric. Like I said, I'm sewing at a 1/2 inch, just a personal preference. You could sew at a 1/4, 3/8 here, wouldn't really matter. Now that I've got that done, I'm gonna press my seam. All right, so I'm gonna set this aside for now while I finish preparing the rest of my items. This will be my tabs. So this is the side here, just my little grip tabs. They're just useful for helping me open it and close it. That's all they are. You could, though, do some larger D-rings here if you'd like. You could even add in a swivel hook if you wanted to. It just depends on how you're going to use it or how the person you're gifting it to is going to use it. So any of those options are great, but I'm just going to leave it as simple tabs. So they're 2.5 inches on each side, but we'll do a 5-inch piece all together, and then we'll cut it in half later. I'm ironing it in half, and then I'm ironing in each of the sides to meet that seam in the middle. So now I've got my tab strap. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine, and I'm going to sew down each side. I'm going to do a little bit less than 1/8 of an inch. You could add additional decorative stitches in here if you'd like, but you just need to make sure that you're closing up this side here. So we'll do definitely 1 stitch on this side. I like to make it same, symmetrical. So I'll add a stitch line on this side, but like I said, you could add additional stitches, or you could even leave that one off. So I'm going to set this aside so that I can sew this in just a minute. I'm going to get the rest of my ironing done. So this is what it looks like when it's finished. Again, the same, it's just narrower. So I'm going to do all of my corner binding strips first, and then I'll do my edge binding strips. So I'm done with the binding strips. I just want to show you what those are on the inside. So these corner pieces right here, this is going to be this strip, and then this edge right here, you only see a little bit of it, but that edge was made up by this longer strip. So if you want to, you can jazz up the inside by changing these strips to a contrasting material. Maybe you want to use the exterior material on the inside. Any of that works. Okay, we don't need these yet, so we're going to set those to the side. Now we're ready to top stitch this like I was talking about. I do like to use my edge stitching foot for something like this. If your machine has one, highly suggest you use it. Moving my needle over 3 places. My usual 1/8 of an inch is 5 places. So it's a little bit under 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm going to bring my stitch length up to 3.75. I doubt you can see it, but there's just very thin seam allowance stitches along the outside. That's all that is. Okay, I can cut this in half because I only need 2.5 inches per side. Okay, so now I've got my 2 tabs. I'm going to set those aside for now. And I believe we're ready to move on to the zipper. Okay, so zipper options. You can use a fixed length zipper. So this is one you might buy. I'm not sure who sells them. You could definitely buy them online, but you could also potentially buy them at Michael's. I know Hobby Lobby has some. But anyways, this is what the zipper would look like if you bought it as a fixed length zipper. So it's got little edges on the top. It comes with a zipper pull, and you buy it in a certain length, and that length is the zipper teeth. So it's from top to bottom zipper teeth, and then this is like a little bit of extra. If you're using a fixed zipper like this, I highly suggest something in the 14-inch range so that you have enough space on either side to maneuver the pouch to be able to unzip it fully and top stitch the second side. So it's an option. If you're using zipper by the foot meter, depending on where you are, you're just going to unroll your zipper, give yourself plenty of space on the side for what reason I already mentioned with the other one. So I'm just estimating, I don't know, maybe 2 inches on each side. It's probably overkill, but I would prefer it to be too long than too short. Zipper tape frays really badly, so anytime you cut it, you want to go over the edges with some sort of a lighter. With zipper tape, I have to supply my own zipper pull. I don't have a great reason to put it on yet, so I'm not going to. So we'll leave that to the side. Instead, I'll get started here on my first side. We'll lay the zipper tape teeth down, clip. I think we've talked about this before, but sometimes I like to baste ahead of time. Sometimes I don't find it necessary, but I am going to go ahead and baste this. So all that means is I'm going to do a narrow stitch, maybe like 1/8 of an inch, and a long stitch, maybe 4 millimeters, just to keep it in place when I go to add my lining. So I'm going to turn my attention to my lining fabric. So this is a perfect match, right? I've got perfect match on the top, perfect match on the bottom. This is definitely okay. This works. However, I find that no matter how hard I try, I get a little bit of slippage on the ends or on the zipper this way. So instead of leaving it at the full 9x10, I'm going to go ahead and shave off 1/8 of an inch on one side. So 1/8 of an inch here, 1/8 of an inch there, that's it. So it's not a lot, and I'm only taking it off of one side, so it's a 1/16 of an inch. But it seems to be just enough play so I don't end up with that problem. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. All right, so let's take a look. Yeah, that's better. So when I take a look at everything lined up, I see just the smallest sliver on either side, but because I've basted at the top and I've given myself that little bit of wiggle room, I should not have an issue balancing things out or matching seams up when I get to the tube stage of the project. When I sew this one, I'm going to flip this face down on the machine because this is the fabric that's more likely to move and shift. And I want that to be controlled by the feed dogs. Those are on the bottom of the machine. So I'll actually be sewing along this side here. And I'll be sewing in at 1/4 of an inch, and I'll bring my stitch length down to 2.5. For this, I'll also switch to my zipper foot. All right, so I've got my zipper sandwich. That's what people refer to this as. Finished on one side. So I'm going to flip up both of these and start pressing. And now I will top stitch. So just like before, I'm going to top stitch along here at 1/8 of an inch and a 4mm seam allowance this time. Top stitching is one of those things that doesn't take a lot of effort but ends up making the finished product look really nice. And good top stitching is just practice. Go slow. Try to keep things even. If you have a hard time keeping a consistent seam allowance, you can draw a line. There's nothing wrong with taking an air erasing marker, measuring in, and then sewing directly on that line. In fact, anytime that you're struggling with keeping a certain seam allowance or anything, you can just draw the line and sew on it. Okay, so now that we're done with this size, we need to take a break to add the tag. If you're not adding a tag, just skip ahead. For this, I'm going to find the middle. Very unscientifically, I'm just lining up the exterior fabric here on the edge. Could also measure in, but I never trust myself enough for that. You can really put your tag anywhere you'd like, but I tend to go about 1 inch from the top. Okay, tag is on there. I left these tails long because I'm going to pull them to the back. So I'm tugging on this thread back here. It creates a loop where that front thread is. Tie these together 3 times. Once I've done that, I feel pretty good about cutting it. I'll seal that up a little bit of fire. We'll take a look at the front. At the end, I will apply some fray check to my tag. And this is a good sort of CYA for just all the time if you're afraid something's going to end up fraying. So I'll apply a little bit of fray check, especially along the sides here. And that just makes sure that it's not going to fray. All right, so now I'm ready to do the second side. I'm going to pull my exterior fabric up. I'm checking to make sure that not only is it lined up along the top with the zipper tape, but it's also lined up along the side with the other side that I already sewed. I'm going to baste this again, but if you're comfortable not basting, you don't have to. So I've basted this up here. It's time to flip this around and bring the lining up. Bring the lining up straight as well, trying to line it up with itself. It should naturally fall inside of the exterior because of that little bit that we trimmed off the edges. All right, so we're going to take this over to the machine. Remember though that when we're looking at this, we see this fabric here is the one that's most likely to shift and move. We want that face down against the feed dogs, so we're actually going to sew along this side. We're going to sew that at 1/4 inch with a 2.5 stitch length because we're concerned about construction. We want to make sure it stays together, which is why we use that smaller stitch length. All right, we've sewn this on. Before, when we were at the Michael, we were talking about how you have to sew this a little bit shorter, the interior fabric a little bit shorter so that you don't get as much bunching on the inside. And so the same thing applies here. Yeah, that's my seam from earlier. I want to bring the interior fabric up a little bit so that it's not even. And that just happened automatically because I trimmed it. But if it doesn't, you'll pull your fabric up a little bit. You may even have a little bit of overhang here. And that's fine because that's what you're trying to achieve, is a little bit of room for the interfacing. So that interfacing takes up some of that gap. Okay, so we're ready now to top stitch the second side, almost. Before we do that, we need to make sure we're setting ourselves up for success on the zipper. So I need to, just like I did before, mark where my zipper is when it's closed, because I'm about to tear this apart. Tear is a strong word. I'm about to unzip it. The next step I have to take is to make sure that I know which way I want the zipper to go on, and I'm going to mark which side needs to go in first to the zipper. So this is the side here. I don't know if you can see that with the label, and I always want my label in the front and that zipper to come this way, to pull this way. So I know I'm going to enter from this side. So I'll additionally mark which tooth is first, so that I know. You can see there, I don't know if you can see, but this tooth is a little bit higher than this one. So I'll mark that that side needs to go on first. I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but this is a number 5 zipper, which is wider than the number 3 zipper that we used for the Michael. Let's see if I can get you a comparison. So this is the Michael size zipper, that number 3. So not only is the tape wider on the 5, but also the teeth. You can see there's a pretty big difference there on the teeth. That actually makes it a lot easier for us to get the zipper pull on. So it's a good thing. All right, so now that I've got myself marked, I'm free to unzip this all the way. I'm just pulling it apart. If you're using a fixed zipper, you're just going to zip it all the way into the end so that you're able to turn this right side out. And that's why I said that it's important to have a little bit of extra room. Okay, now that I've got myself inside out, I like to take my fingernail and push along this side. It's a little bit harder because there's not a full zipper there to help us. So using my finger there just helps to get everything a little bit further pushed down. So that's nice and flat. Now I'm going to take it to the sewing machine and top stitch. Top stitching is 1/8 of an inch with my edge foot, 1/8 of an inch seam allowance with a 3.5 to 4 millimeter stitch length. Okay, I'm done with my zipper construction. I could certainly add my zipper now, but I think that I'm going to go ahead. I'll show you. This is where you would typically mark your middle. So if this was just a plain piece of fabric, you have no middle marking, but you need one for later. So you'd mark your middle. The nice thing is that I already have a middle marked because it's my sew line. So instead what I'll do is I'll fold along that line and I will mark my lining. I'll take scissors in there and just give it a little bit of a snip. It just helps me make sure I'm not super misaligned in the next step. Now I can add my zipper and then I will turn it around. Checking to see which side I need to add my zipper on. It's this side, and like we talked about, when that label is facing me, I will zip it closed this way and unzip it this way. So then when I'm looking at my zipper tape, you see the two sides of the zipper pull. One side needs to go in first, and I know because I marked it that it's this left side. So I'll try to seat that left side first, and then the right will come after. With the number 5 zipper, it's a lot easier to see the teeth. You can kind of tell before you get too far in whether or not it's going to be a good match. Okay, looks pretty even to me. Start pulling it together. That's nice and even. My lines look good here. I'm going to pull it all the way off so that I fully close this side up. There is an option to just sew it closed instead, but you always have a little bit of a gap. It never looks quite as good as when you've closed it. So we'll go ahead and take the extra step. Left side first. Push that in. Good. All right, I'm going to bring that to the middle so it's less likely to slip off the edges, but that's also why I have extra zipper tape so that it's less likely to slip off the edge. I'm ready to turn this inside out. Official tube stage. Oops. See, I pulled it a little bit and it came a little bit undone, but we're nowhere near the edge, so we're okay. All right, everything is pulled out and I've got my tube. Now what I need to do is actually set this aside for just a minute while I prepare the rest of my tabs, because I'm going to need to stick my tabs in right there when I go to sew the ends closed. Let's set that to the side. Take another look at our tabs. There are many ways that you can prepare your tabs to put them in your project. One of the ways is to do nothing more than just clip it, right? So I'll take this in half, clip it, and I'm good to go to put it in my project. If you happen to have problems with things slipping, which obviously I do, which is why I take so many precautions, you can sew this edge or you can tape it. So I'm going to go ahead and tape it. This is 1/4 inch double-sided tape. This is nice. I can just tear it. So I'm just going to apply a little bit of tape down there at the bottom on both of these sides. I'll peel that off. Both of my tabs are ready. In the Michael stage, we would have put a swivel clasp on one of these. In fact, I went ahead and pulled examples. I wouldn't use this in this way, but if you planned on doing this, or you knew that somebody would want it for a specific kind of gift, you could put the swivel hook on here. This is a 3/4 of an inch and it would fit perfectly. Alternatively, you could add a D-ring. If you knew somebody was really likely to constantly hang this, maybe they were going to use it as a travel toiletry bag and they're going to frequently hang it on the outside of their bag or something like that, you could add either one of these. So the D-ring and the swivel hook are both 3/4 of an inch. That's the size hardware that you want for this. Okay, so now that I've got my pulls done, I'm going to go ahead and trim my zipper a little bit so I can get my clips on where I want them. I'm not going to go all the way up. That makes me a little bit uncomfortable. I'll do that later when I have to. But for right now, I'm just going to trim a little bit. This will fray as I work with it. So I know it seems extra, but I am going to go ahead, hit that with a little bit of fire. All right, so now I'm going to take my tab and line it up inside of my 2 zipper edges. So it lines straight up inside there. I'll clip. This is why I made it shorter so my little clips could get over there. Okay. And then my next step is to clip the whole edge together. So I'll bring this would be a marked edge, or this is the seam from where you attach your 2 pieces, to the very center of the zipper tape and clip. And now I'll do the same thing with the exterior. Now I can't expect this to meet that exterior line because I cut it a little bit short, and that's okay. That means it'll be less confusing later on. Okay. I'm good on both of those. Sometimes these edges just need a little bit of finessing. We've got more exterior fabric length than we do interior. Sometimes they just feel upset about that. So you may have to get your finger in there and kind of rotate a little bit, pull it around, but you can make it work. Now that I've got that ready to clip, I like to clip one of these here and then the other one on the side. It's less likely to get in my way when I begin to sew, and I feel like it does a better job of containing the madness. All right, so now that I've got both of my ends clipped, I need to sew them. I'm going to sew this at 1/4 inch. So I'll be sewing straight down this line and down this line. Okay, so sewing down each line 1/4 inch, and then I want to follow not my interior fabric, but my exterior. I'm at 1/4 inch, but the way that I'm going to sew this, because you're not going to be able to see on the machine, is I'm actually going to start right here. I'm going to sew all the way here to the end, and then I'm going to either turn around and go back, or I'll pick up my presser foot and come all the way back here and sew this direction to the end. The reason I like to do that is because the middle is the part that needs to be spot on. So I want to start there so that it doesn't have an opportunity to shift as I'm pushing from side to side. So again, I'll start here, push that way, start here, push that way on both sides. Okay, both ends are closed up. I've got my tabs in there. I've got my zipper on. These are all mistakes, things that you could forget to put on before you sew it closed, but they're small problems. Okay, now we do need to trim all the way up to the side. Okay, onto the end binding. For the end binding, we are eventually going to cut corners out of here, so I don't actually have to have my binding go the full width of the project. Certainly don't want it longer than that, but I find I like the exact width. I don't know. So you could have your shorter, like honestly, even one of these little short 3.5 ones is probably fine because I'm going in a full 1.25 inches on the side. But I don't know. I like the full width. Makes me happy. So I'm going to go ahead and put this binding strip, which again is folded into fourths. I'm going to put this on this side with the zipper. And I do that because this will be the side that kind of looks good no matter what. And the other side, which will not be as visible, that's the side that you could kind of mess up and it's fine. Like you see how you can't even, this seam right here, you can't even see this on the other side, right? You can't get in there and look at it. So if it's not great, it's okay. Nobody can see it. We'll kind of pay attention to the same principle when we put these side pieces on, the corner binding, because when you're looking at it, you will likely see this side in the bag. I don't know if you can see that on the inside, but you're really not going to see the other side unless you're purposefully flipping it inside out. So we're all about making it look good while allowing ourselves to be human. Okay, so I'm going to line these up with the edge. When I go to sew this, I'm going to sew it with a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. I am going to sew face down. So I set this here. You could sew either way, but since I'm not following any of the lines, I don't need to sew with that face up. Instead, I'll sew on this side because this fabric down here is the one that's more likely to move. Okay, both of them sewn on. You can see that was my original stitch line there, the 1/4 inch. That's my 3/8 of a stitch line for the binding strip. I'm going to trim a couple of these stray threads to make sure they don't give me trouble when I turn the binding. And then my next job is to just turn it. So because we ironed this line here, it should end up just kind of folding over on itself without too much effort. And then this back piece we fold in and then over, just like that. Now the toughest spot, just like in the mica, will be over the zipper. So make sure that that section is good. You've got enough fabric to overhang. And then you can go ahead and lay down the other pieces. As you sew, it's also nice to give this just a little bit of extra support when you're pressing it through to make sure it doesn't have room to shift. This is also why we go a little bit bigger on the binding than we ordinarily would for a 3/8 of an inch seam, is because we're dealing with a little bit of extra width. We don't want to sacrifice the way it looks. Okay, so now I'm all secure. I'm going to stitch from this side, and I will stitch nice and close along here. If you're finding that 1/8 of an inch is giving you trouble, you can go in further. You just don't want to go so far in that you end up with this side sort of flapping up where you can see the previous stitches. So you want to try to go 1/16 of an inch, 1/8 of an inch in. And you can certainly bring your stitch length up to a top stitch length here. I'll probably go with 3.5. All right, so I've sewn both of the edge bindings on. Let me trim a couple of threads, and then moment of truth, we will flip it over. Okay, we caught everything. There's a little bit of a, I don't know, a little bit of a mess up here. Just like part of the binding fell over forward before I started sewing. But again, we're going to cut this off, so it's not going to matter. Most importantly, we caught here along the zipper. Everything looks fine. Again, caught here along the zipper. Okay, so we're good on that part. This looks pretty much like the inside of the Michael once we get to this stage, right? So not a lot is different. Honestly, the biggest differences come in the next step. But not yet, because next I just have to mark my corners, which is exactly what we do with the Michael. So when I'm marking my corner, I'm going to use 1 1/4 inches as my boxed corner. Remember, if you want a taller box, 1 1/4 inch taller, so 1.5 inch box, that's up to you. Opportunities are endless. This is also how you can sort of make any shape, size bag that you want. Is you just have to figure out, okay, I want it to be this tall, I want it to be this wide, and then plug it into a formula and it'll figure out what your cuts need to be. Or you can just experiment. So we're going to do 1 1/4. When I'm measuring this, I measure in from this side. So 1 1/4 there. But then when I'm measuring from the bottom, I can't measure until I get to my binding strip line right here. If you ever have trouble with going to the sew line there, then try to go instead to this line. It just depends on how close to the line you're sewing, how much extra room you give yourself between the binding and the stitches. But anyways, general rule of thumb, go to either the stitch line or to this binding strip line right there. So let's go 1 1/4 in from the left. And then we're going to try 1 1/4 from the stitch line. I'm going to extend this all the way onto the binding from the front side. And just repeat. Okay, once I've marked my corners on this side, like I said, I'm going all the way up on the binding. Then I'm going to flip it over. You don't have to do this part. I just get nervous about my lines, and that makes me feel better to do it. So I'm going to mark on the back as well. But I don't need to mark all the way up onto the binding. Once you've marked everything, it's time to make these squares into triangles. So at this point, it's okay to open my zipper up all the way. In fact, it gives me a little bit more maneuvering room. I'm going to stick my finger into the corner here to make sure everything is smoothed out. and then I'm going to find this corner here and this corner and pinch on those lines. Okay, I'm going to pull this out, and I should be left with a pretty good looking triangle. I'm going to push this away from the zipper, this binding edge away from the zipper, just like you saw it on the inside of the bag. Okay, that's my first one done. So I repeat, push my finger in so that I can make sure I have no crinkles, no wrinkles on my fabric, my exterior fabric. I find my corners and pinch. And this is why I like to mark both sides. Pull, pull, pull below the line to get everything nice and flat. Make sure my binding is headed in the right direction. Okay, now I've got my little ears on all four corners. That's what makes this a box. I'm going to go ahead and sew those. When I sew, I'll flatten everything out like this, and I'm going to sew always from the side of the binding straight across. If I want to, if I'm concerned about my binding, it feels thick, I'm not sure it's going to go all the way through, I could spend a couple of stitches here going back and forth just to make sure that this all stays tacked down. I find that if you do 2.5 millimeter seam allowance, you really don't have that big of an issue unless you're using very thick material. So I probably won't, but you certainly can. You do, however, want to backstitch on both this side and the other side. I'm going to go ahead and do that for all four. All four corners are sewn. Now we're going to find out if any of them ended up wonky. I'll show you how we do that. So when I'm looking at it from this side, I should be able to see parallel lines, right? Same thing on this side. These are unlikely to get messed up because these are the lines you drew. You knew they were straight before you started sewing. The area where you're going to experience some trouble is on the other side. So on this side, when I pull these flaps down, I'm looking for this to be, again, parallel to each other and sort of like a proper base to a pyramid. How fun this is, finding out if I made a mistake together. This one is not bad. So I'm a little bit inside of the drawn line on this side, but this still looks like a pretty solid base. Now over on this side, it's okay, but it's not great. So right around here, instead of going straight up to the left of it, I kind of veered in a little bit. Yeah. I'm not going to fix it. I think it's fine. But if I was feeling awful about it, then I could fix it. But for right now, it's a small problem. I'm okay with it. Check the other side. Okay, this side is fine. It's inside the line, but it looks straight. It looks good. This one is gonna need a redo. So this one, not only is it inside the line, which we talked about is okay, but it just very clearly is not straight. Like it's not parallel with the other line, right? We're looking for parallel, perpendicular, and it doesn't do that. And that's totally okay. I just have to redo it. So I'm going to rip this one out, redo it. We'll come back and find out if it looks any better. Steps I go through, I'll share them with you to check to see what kind of mistakes I could have made. Include remeasuring. So I'm just going to check and make sure that I got that right. Honestly, when I look at it like this, it kind of looks like maybe I drew the box a little wonky. See how it curves in right there? Maybe that's it. Another big one is sometimes when I go to get my triangle right, I remember to do this part, great. But when it comes to this part, if you don't really kind of pull this under and make sure that it's pulled all the way, it can lead to some wonkiness. So we'll hope that by redrawing it, hope that it'll work. Yeah, I think it was, that line was a little bit off. All right, so there's my new line. Ah, that's better. Fixed. Little problem, easily fixed. All right, I'm gonna do some general trim maintenance. Okay, so when we do the Michael, this is where we stop, right? Let me show you. Okay, here's the inside of the Michael. I mean, it looks the same. Right, so we stop there and we leave these tabs here because one, we bound the edges nicely, so there's no raw edges. But two, it helps give the bag a little bit more structure, and it would just be a pain to try and bind those little tiny edges. So we leave them be. On this big bag, I suppose you could do the same thing. If you folded this over at the edge nicely, I guess there's no reason why you couldn't leave them there. But we're not going to, because that's not what I want to do. So instead, we're going to cut them and bind them. So first we'll start with measuring a cut line, because I could eyeball it, but I'd probably mess up. And I want a little bit more perfection than that. So I'm marking a line that's 3/8 of an inch away. Now I cut. I'll be honest with you, sometimes it is hard to cut something you've just made. After I've cut it off, my next job is to take all of these and line them up with that raw edge. These are my side binding pieces, the 3.5 inch wide. I line all of this up, and then I'm going to sew on this side directly on my line of stitching from before, exactly on that line. This is what it looks like done. I've sewn directly on that line. You will get a little bit of a hump in the middle of each sewn line. Just make sure that your stitch either continues straight over the top or goes out just a little. You just don't want to see it go in like this, because that's going to be stitches that you have to see in the end. Once this is done, and here's why that hump is there. You just have lots of layers of fabric all in the same place. So once this is done, then you'll bind the edge up. The process looks like this. Same as the end, I just fold this over on my line that I've already ironed. I'm going to bring both of these edges in like this. And then I'm going to fold them down. It can be much easier to do this if you're using either an iron to iron the edges down or a glue stick. This is a sewing specific glue stick by Sewline, but you could honestly just use regular kids' school glue, and that would be fine. I'm going to glue along that flap. I'm folding it in until the very edge right here. And when I fold it, I'm trying to keep the line, this bottom line of the binding, even with the stitches. That way, when I fold it all down, there shouldn't be too much of that protruding past the bottom of the binding. So I've added my glue, fold, trying to keep everything basically in order, keep that near that stitching line, and now I do my double fold. Okay. If you have problems covering up your previous stitching, you may find yourself wanting to trim this down further. So that, for example, sometimes the fabric is just thicker. So if I do that, I'm gonna push everything back and I'm gonna take just a little sliver off the end. Then when I go to wrap up again, you'll see it's much easier for me to cover those stitches at the bottom. I would rather do this additional trim if I need to than I would to give myself too little binding. That's why I don't cut it more than that, or I leave 3/8 of an inch here instead of just cutting or leaving just a quarter, because sometimes I don't need to make the additional cut, sometimes I do. So play around with it, figure out what works best for you. But I find that I'd rather, like with the zipper, leave myself extra slack, and if I don't need it, I can cut it down later. So I'm going to go ahead and sew the rest of these, sewing them directly on the sew line here. I'll apply this one here. I'm also, excuse me, I'm also choosing to sew this from the zipper side, just like we did with this, because this side is going to be the side that's visible at the end. So I'll attach all these binding pieces and then I'll come back and show you how we finish this off. I want to pause on this last one and show you what it might look like if you were using an iron instead of the glue that I mentioned. Let me grab my iron real quick. So the same thing I was doing with the glue, bringing that over. I'm going to want to do that with my iron instead. So I get it folded just the way I like. I don't need to spend long here. And in fact, if I spend too long here with the iron, I may have a hard time getting it to fold properly because I will have ironed out all of my folds. So see how much better those stay in once they've been ironed. Now the other thing about trimming is now, if you see here, hard to see, it's tone on tone, but if you see I have quite a bit of extra room to play with, I don't want to make the mistake of pulling this back piece super far down, right? So that when I look at the side, it's very uneven. Instead, I just want to pull it down to its natural fold, or the fold that we ironed in earlier. And when I look on the side, I really want those to match up. So I want a straight line all the way across my binding there. So that extra room that I've given myself, it's okay if it's not 100% filled, because it won't be an issue when the bag is turned. Okay? And in fact, it'll give you a better look because all of your stitch lines will be clearly covered and you won't have to worry about any of those raw edges showing or anything like that. All right, so now we're ready to go ahead and sew down all of the sides, the corner bindings. So just like I did along the edge, I'm going to use 1/8 of an inch along here. I can lengthen my stitch to 3.5, 4, and then we'll flip it over and make sure that we've caught everything on the back side. Okay, these look okay. So they're not going to look beautiful. I'll tell you that right now. There's just too much stuff going on, to be honest with you. There's too much shifting, too many things you're trying to account for. So here's what you're looking for. Here's what indicates success. The biggest one is that you're covered on both sides. I guess what I mean by that is your stitches have caught both sides of your binding. So it's caught along here and it's caught along the back. So everything is secure. When I look at the sides here, there's no raw edge I'm concerned about. Same thing over here. There are little tiny ears down here. If those bothered me a ton, I could just pull this up, trim them maybe. But like I mentioned at the beginning, I'll just take some fray check, just as easy as can be, dab it on there, make sure that those don't become a problem in the future, right? And this is why we sew and put on the binding from this side, because as long as this side looks neat, that's good. Like we're not going to see the underside of this one, and we're hardly ever going to see the back side of this, because it's going to be pressed up against the side of the bag. You'll be able to see that a little bit better when we turn the bag right side out. For all intents and purposes, you are done. You'll go through and trim all of your threads. I highly suggest that you run a lighter over all your extra threads. Pull out any pieces of fabric that may be hanging out there at the top. Once we're done here, we'll turn the bag right side out and I'll show you how I finish it with the iron. Okay. This is what the finished bag looks like inside out. Let's turn it right side out. We're going to push out all of these corners. There's our bag. There's our finished bag. So from here, it's just pressing to finish. Pressing that final product really makes a difference. So some of the places that I always press, obviously the body, right? Got a little bit of crinkle here. This isn't lying quite as flat as it was before. So I'll obviously hit those things. But the part that really helps make your bag sharp is if you pinch your corners out here and then apply some heat. Okay, that's all you're doing. You're just encouraging the bag to take that shape that you want it to. You can see the difference between these two corners, right? They're sewn and constructed the same. You watched me do it all, but the one that's been ironed looks significantly better than the one that hasn't. An additional tool that you can use is a wooden clapper. So this is really for applying pressure to the area that you just applied heat to. So on this corner, I'm going to push it all out. I'll apply the heat to the area. And then as it's cooling, if I apply additional pressure as it cools from the clapper, that will help me get an even crisper line. Right? I've compressed a little bit more of this fabric. And so you can see it's a little bit sharper, a little bit thinner right there along the edge. So love clappers. I also find it helpful sometimes to smooth out areas that aren't responding well to the heat. So you can apply heat to an area, and then as it dries, you just go over it with the clapper. Encourage that fabric to stay smooth. So we'll finish up all the sides, and then we'll take one last look inside, particularly at our binding, so we understand here's what the final user sees. And you'll understand why some of the mistakes that can happen just aren't that big of a deal. That's what's nice about this bag, is you can hide a lot of small problems. But these construction elements apply for any bag this shape, right, that's done this way. So something as small as the Gabe to I've made really long ones for curling irons, for example, for a kid to take to college. Or I've made big giant ones for like clothing bags to take when you travel. So any size works. Okay, so now as we look on the inside, we do still have a little bit of extra fabric, but as I iron, it'll get a little bit better. It'll look a little bit smoother. Okay, so when we look on the inside, do you see how we only see the top of this edge, but then even on the sides, we're only seeing this outer edge that we made sure was pretty. You're not really ever seeing the other side, the stitching on the other side. So when you look straight down into it, it all looks closed up. It looks clean, professional. You know, our top stitching really helps it look good in the end. So these don't take that long. And the Gabe that I showed you, that longer, thinner one that you can use as a pencil case or a crochet hook holder, that is the same exact process. The only difference you're making is that instead of applying the zipper on the 9-inch side, you apply the zipper on the 10-inch side. But it's otherwise the same. So super simple, super easy to customize, but these are a tried and true favorite. I mean, you can stick anything in here. Everybody needs a bag like this. So good luck. Let me know if you have any questions, need any help, get stuck anywhere. I'll do my best to help. Thanks.